Hello and welcome back to Blue Marble Photography. I hope everything is going well for you. Hope your photography walk is treating you well. I hope you're growing. That's the big part about what we're trying to do here is give you the techniques and the a little bit of insight and knowledge to help you grow a little bit quicker than learning things like like a lot of us do, where we just do this kinesthetic sort of shooting and we find out the things we shouldn't be doing and then we go out and we try to fix it. So hopefully you can kind of skip that part of making the mistakes and just get right into understanding, practicing those things that you're going to have to do. And that certainly is a photography must. You will need to practice. That's just the way things are. So what we're going to talk about today is focus. Now, a lot of us think we know, of course, you want things in focus. That's what photography is about. It's about having things in focus. Or maybe some of the things are out of focus, and that's another thing we'll talk about later. But today we're going to talk about the things that you want tack sharp. Those things that you want to be right on the money. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about will be about video, but essentially the same principles apply to photography as well. And when you learn how to do things in photography, they translate into videography in a very large way. Not always, but a lot of what you learn in photography, you carry over if you're going to do video as well. So, when do I use autofocus? When do I use manual focus? That's the big question, right? And this is something you're going to learn if you're new about your camera, because this is what you have to learn. You have to learn what your camera can and can't do. And then you act accordingly, depending on the type of camera that you have, paired with whatever lens that you have. So all of these things stack up to inform you what you need to do next. So when will I use autofocus? That's the big question, right? Well, I think it's fairly safe to say that autofocus today in the newer cameras is really, really good. It's great. We have cameras that will detect the eye and focus on the eye. And it'll detect a face and find the face. It'll look for smiles. So today's cameras are really awesome. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to work. Well, I can't tell you. You have to figure that out on your own with your own camera. If it does all that in autofocus, then get those settings put into place and then go make some portraits and see if it works. And so, when will I use autofocus? Well, if we're talking about photography and you know that your camera can do these things really well in autofocus, that's probably what you're going to do, say at a wedding. Well, I want to make sure that that bride's eyes are tack sharp and that groom's eyes are tack sharp. And if you're thinking about how much depth of field you need to go back and look at the aperture in-depth video that we've already made and look and see how that will affect your final output. So in those cases, if you trust your camera and you know that it's going to do all those things and you've paired it with a lens that you know exactly how it works, then autofocus is probably a great choice to make in those instances. And like I say, cameras nowadays have come a long way, and the ones that weren't catching up are catching up. And I don't need to get into the brands and all that, but we know who they are. All you have to do is look at YouTube and follow a few camera guys, and they're all reporting the same thing. So when do I not use autofocus? Okay, that's a bigger question, I think. And why should I have to learn how to pull focus on anything? Why should I have to learn that? Why would I have to go into a manual focus situation? Well, what happens if you're testing out your camera for all those things we just talked about? for a portrait shoot, and you realize that it will lock on eventually. But if you, sorry for all the bird sound in the background. I have birds around here. So, sorry about that. But so, if you're in that situation and you realize that your camera and lens combination will pull the focus eventually, but it takes, it can breathe in and out of focus until it really finally locks on. Then you're going to have to make some decisions. If you're in a high stress scenario where breathing is not, okay, I can't depend on that. I need to be able to get these shots quick. This is not where everybody's standing there and, I have that few seconds or second or two for the breathing to go away and lock on. Okay, this is not that. This is more of a candid moment, but I want things to be in focus, and I'm still making compositions the way I want them. So I can't depend on autofocus. Then you need to go to manual focus. And so I would just say, practice your manual focus capabilities. Get your camera out of autofocus and start pulling your own focus. Now, this translates into the video world as well. Okay, so say you're you're vlogging and you're pointing the camera at yourself, it's probably going to lock on your face. But what if it wanders in and out? Well, then there's going to be issues, right? And maybe you want to get a different camera eventually. And maybe you want to do just what I'm doing, which is just putting the camera, a certain distance away from you, and you're not really moving around much, so the camera stays on focus. But now let's talk about the videography side of it, or even cinema. If you've watched movies at all, more than likely nobody had a camera in autofocus. Okay, let that sink in just a second here. All the movies that have ever been made, more than likely, 99.9% of the time, if not 100% of the time, nobody had an autofocus system working on that camera. Now, if you're doing YouTube and you're vlogging and it's talking heads and that sort of thing, that's different. But when you're working in a giant stage full of people who are being paid to make this one shot, you've got a director, you've got a DP, you've got an artist, somebody who's selecting all the colors and all the stage hands, and you got a grip guy doing audio, and you got a head audio guy, and you've got the camera guy, right? He's the photographer. He's making this shot. The director of photography is telling him where to point his camera, and they're talking to a guy who's a focus puller and telling him, okay, when this dialogue happens, you are on this person, and then we're going to move the shot to this other person, or maybe they're both in the same shot, and he tells the focus puller, when this dialogue happens, I want you to focus on this person in the same scene. See what I'm saying? Sometimes focus has to be pulled manually. That's all there is to it. Let's say you're a photographer and you want to make bird photography. Birds in a tree. Good luck. Good luck. Now, I'll say this. Cameras are starting to employ animal recognition and maybe bird recognition and bird eye. And this is like, wow, this is an advancement that is far and away better than anything we've seen in the past 200 years, okay? So I don't think photography's been around that long, but my point is some camera systems employed with specific lenses can probably pull that off. But most that the gear that I've used really can't. Now, I do have a camera that says it recognizes animals, and I've tried it, and it was just kind of, 50-50. Some of it kind of worked, some of it didn't. But I know this, if I'm shooting a bird in a tree or anywhere, say it's in a field somewhere, that autofocus is going to be hunting around for all kinds of stuff. And sometimes it latches onto the bird very quickly. But if I magnify that focus and I reach in and look, I can see that the details aren't there. It just kind of latches onto something and kind of just puts it there. It's not that great because you want that eye in focus. And I've learned that with my gear, I have to get magnified focus, look really close as I can to the subject, and then refine the focus. And that is what I have to do. I have to pull focus to get the shot, and that's my point. Sometimes you have to pull focus, and that's all there is to it. And it's because of the gear that we have. And the only way that you will find out is by testing it. And you have to go test it. And when you find, and you start pixel peeping, right? You start zooming in on that image and you're finding, you know what? This focus isn't that great. Then you will know better when to pull focus and when not to pull focus. So that is my advice to you, is to go out and practice the focus capabilities of your gear and test it and see if it does what you think it will do. And do it before you start getting serious about making photographs, because I learned this stuff by accident. It's like, oh, well, that didn't work. I just spent 2 hours trying to make photographs of these birds, and half of them didn't turn out, or more than half. Only a couple of them turned out of hundreds or thousands even. And we learn these things by practice. So that's my advice to you. Go practice your focus and learn how to pull focus. That's extremely important to every photographer. Anybody who wants to be a photographer, whether it be in video or in stills, whether you want to be professional, whether you want to just make some group shots of your family at home, which we're going to get into that as well. And we're going to talk about lighting eventually as well, and why it's important to provide lots of light for your photograph. And we're going to get into that as well. Anyway, thank you for coming by. Thank you for listening. And I hope you become an avid photographer. Thank you again.